The camera opens on clouds. Thin, white, 38,000 feet below the stratosphere. Inside the cabin, row 14, aisle seat, a woman in blue scrubs sits with her hands folded in her lap. Her badge reads, Sarah Cole, registered nurse, Memorial Regional Hospital. She is reading nothing, watching nothing. Her eyes are still in the way that only people who have learned stillness on purpose are still. At the front of the plane, behind the cockpit door, a sound. Not an alarm. Not turbulence. A sound worse than both. A human body hitting the floor. The cabin crew moves fast. Passengers crane their necks. A flight attendant's voice breaks over the intercom. Is there a doctor on board? Is there anyone with medical training? Nobody moves. Sarah Cole closes her book. She does not rush. She does not raise her.
The shift started at 5:50 in the morning, the way it always did, not with an alarm. Sarah Cole had not used an alarm in 11 years. She simply opened her eyes at 5:15, lay still for exactly 4 minutes. Not from laziness, but from habit, a practice she had carried from another life, and then rose, folded her blanket with the corners squared, and moved to the kitchen. She made coffee, black, no sugar. She stood at the window while it brewed. Outside, the Denver skyline was still dark at the edges, the mountains behind it invisible in the pre-dawn gray. She watched a garbage truck move slowly down the street below. She watched a dog pull its owner around a corner. She watched a light come on in a third-floor apartment across the way. Someone's alarm had worked for them. She drank her coffee, standing up. She never sat in the mornings. Memorial Regional Hospital was a level 2 trauma center on the northeast edge of Denver. 12 floors, 430 beds, a rotating staff of over 900 people. It was not the best hospital in the city. It was not the worst. It was busy in the specific way that mid-tier urban hospitals are busy. A constant, grinding rhythm of need that never quite reached catastrophe, but never allowed comfort either. Sarah had worked the surgical recovery ward for 3 years. Before that, ICU. Before that, a gap in her resume that HR had noted once, asked about once, and never asked about again. She arrived at, changed in the locker room, pulled her dark hair back without looking at the mirror, clipped her badge to her left breast pocket. Sarah Cole, registered nurse, Memorial Regional Hospital. She walked to the nursing station on Ward 7C and picked up her chart. Stacked without waiting for the handoff briefing to finish. Cole, the night nurse, Patricia, looked up from her notes. You're early. Same time, as always. Patricia handed over the last chart. Bed 9 is going to be a problem. Mr. Fenton, 62, post-op day 3, from the bowel resection. He's been refusing oral meds since midnight. Says the pills make him nauseous. He's also been, she lowered her voice, though there was no one nearby to hear, rude. All right, I mean genuinely unpleasant. He told Martinez too. I'll see him first, Sarah said. Patricia watched her go. She had worked with Sarah for almost 2 years, and still wasn't entirely sure what to make of her. Sarah was not unfriendly. She was not cold. She was simply contained. She moved through the ward the way water moves through a pipe, efficiently, quietly, without waste. Bed 9. Mr. Fenton was 62 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the particular anger of a man who was used to being in control and was currently trapped in a hospital bed with a drainage tube and paper slippers. He looked at Sarah when she entered with the expression of someone preparing an argument. You're not the regular one, he said. No, I'm Sarah. I'll be with you this morning. I don't want the pills. I've already told 3 different people I know. She pulled the chart from the end of his bed and read it, not quickly, the way staff read charts when they're running behind. Deliberately, she took 40 seconds. Your nausea started after the 2nd dose of the oxycodone. Day 1 post-op. You've had 2 episodes of vomiting. You reported the nausea to the night staff, but they continued the same protocol. Fenton blinked. That's right. That shouldn't have continued. She set the chart down. I'm going to call the attending and ask about switching you 2 for pain management for today. Reducing the opioid dose and adding an anti-nausea protocol. If he agrees, and he should, you won't need the pills this morning. A pause. You can do that, Fenton said, and his voice had changed. The aggression pulled back, replaced by something more fragile underneath. I can ask. He'll agree. She called Dr. Renner from the room telephone. Renner agreed in under 90 seconds, sounding slightly irritated to have been called, but not disputing her assessment. She hung up and made a note in the chart. It'll be set up within the hour, she told Fenton. He looked at her for a moment. Thank you, he said, in the voice of a man who didn't say it often. She nodded once and left. By 10 o'clock, she had seen 14 patients. She had caught a medication transcription error on bed 4 wrong dosage, flagged before administration. She had redressed a wound on bed 11 using a technique the resident had ordered incorrectly, noting the correction in the chart without drama. She had held the hand of a woman in bed, 78 years old, recently widowed, who was recovering from hip surgery and crying quietly because no one had come to visit. She sat with that woman for 7 minutes. She could not give more than 7 minutes, but she gave them completely. At the nursing station, just before noon, a junior nurse named Daniel caught up with her. "Hey Sarah, the charge nurse position on the floor above us. They posted it again. I saw. You should apply." He said it earnestly. He was 26, still in the phase of his career when merit seemed like it should automatically produce opportunity. "Seriously, everyone on this floor knows you're more capable than half the charge nurses in the building. Everyone on this floor is being generous. No, I mean it. You caught the Fenton thing, the bed 4 error, and redressed 11, all before 10 a.m. That's not normal." She was writing in a chart. She didn't look up. The work is the same, either way. The pay isn't. The pay is enough. He waited, hoping she would say more. She didn't. He went back to his station. She left at 3:15, half an hour after her shift ended. She changed back into street clothes, dark jeans, a plain gray shirt, and carried a small duffel bag that had been in her locker all day. Tonight she was flying to Portland, a rare thing. 3 days off, consecutive, which almost never happened. She had no particular plan for Portland. A hotel room, quiet, maybe the coast. She took the bus to the airport. She did not call anyone to say she was leaving. At check-in, the agent looked at her ticket. "Economy, seat 1 4C. Aisle any bags to check?" The agent asked. "No. Have a nice flight." Sarah picked up her boarding pass and walked towards security. She moved through the crowd the way she always moved, not parting it, not pushing, simply finding the spaces between people that others didn't notice, passing through them without friction. An older couple beside her were arguing about which line to join. A businessman behind her was on his phone, loud. A child nearby was crying. Sarah watched all of it, said nothing, found her gate, sat down, waited.
Flight 7714 began boarding at 4:47 in the afternoon. Gate B, 22, Denver International Airport. A regional jet, no, not regional. A Boeing 737-800. Full service. 214 passengers, if every seat was filled. Sarah had counted the gate area while she waited. She did this without thinking about it, the way some people count ceiling tiles or tap rhythms with their fingers. It was not anxiety. It was simply how her mind had learned to process a space. She boarded in Group 4. Economy. She found 14C, lifted her duffel into the overhead bin, and sat down. Aisle seat. She always chose the aisle, not for legroom, for sight lines. The aircraft itself was clean, well-maintained, a few years into its service cycle, but not aged. She had noticed the tail number on the jetway, N7714H. She had noticed the ground crew's pre-flight walk was thorough. The technician on the left engine had paused twice, checked something, moved on. Good sign. He was being careful, not uncertain. She noticed the way the lead flight attendant moved through the cabin during boarding. Her name badge read Monica. She was perhaps 40, precise in her movements, with the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough that the professionalism was no longer performed. It was simply how she moved through a space. She did her job without excess. She redirected a confused passenger to the correct row without condescension. She noticed a child's seatbelt was twisted and fixed it without being asked. Sarah watched her. Monica was competent. That mattered. In the row behind Sarah, a man was already talking at full volume into his phone, describing a medical conference he had just attended in Denver. His voice carried the specific confidence of someone who expected rooms to arrange themselves around his presence. 14 years in vascular surgery, he was saying. These young residents, they don't understand the fundamentals anymore. Sarah put in one earbud. Not music. Silence. Just enough to signal unavailability. She looked at the emergency card in the seat pocket, not because she needed it, but because she always did. Old habit. She noted the exit rows. Rows 15 and 16 on either side. The forward exits at rows 1 and 2. The rear exit at row 28. For exits total, she noted the position of the nearest fire extinguisher. She noted the galley layout visible from her seat. Then she folded the card back and returned it to the pocket. The man behind her was still talking. The cockpit door was open during boarding. Standard procedure. Nothing unusual. Through the gap, Sarah could see the instrument panel, partially visible. She did not stare. She glanced, filed, looked away. 737 to 800 panel. Glass cockpit. The newer configuration. Dual FMC displays. Primary flight displays running standard configuration. Altimeter set. From the angle, she could see roughly 40% of the panel. She did not need more than that. She looked away. She looked at her hands. She had not sat in a cockpit in over 4 years. Captain Harris appeared at the forward galley at 10 minutes before departure. He was perhaps 58, broad, gray at the temples, with the particular ease of a man who had done a difficult thing for so long that the difficulty had become invisible to him. He spoke briefly with Monica. His body language was open, relaxed. He laughed at something she said. Not a performance laugh, a real one. Sarah noticed the way he moved his right hand to his chest while they spoke. A brief gesture. He was mid-sentence when he did it. It lasted perhaps 1 second. His expression did not change. He finished whatever he was saying, nodded once to Monica, and walked back toward the cockpit. Sarah's eyes followed him to the door. She noted what she had seen, filed it, said nothing. The first officer appeared shortly after. Younger, mid-30s, with the focused look of someone still in the phase of their career, when every flight carries a degree of personal significance. His name badge was visible briefly as he passed. Diaz. He moved with competence. Alert. Sarah watched the way his eyes tracked the cabin as he walked. Not paranoid, but present. He was aware of his environment. Good. That mattered too. The doors closed at 5:03. Monica's safety briefing was clean and well-paced. Sarah listened to every word of it. Not because she didn't know it, but because the quality of a safety briefing told you something about the crew's overall standards. Monica's was good. The aircraft pushed back at 5:11. Sarah closed her eyes during taxi. Not to sleep, to listen. The engine spool-up sounded even. Hydraulics normal. No unusual vibrations in the airframe during the turn onto the runway. The acceleration on takeoff roll felt within normal parameters. Rotation at the expected speed. Gear up. Flaps retracted in stages. She opened her eyes at 8,000 feet. The city below was falling away, the mountains catching the last of the afternoon light. Denver spread out in its grid, precise and orderly, and then gave way to the high plateau, and then the Rockies. And then the aircraft leveled off and the seatbelt sign went dark. 214 people relaxed. Drinks were ordered. Laptops opened. The vascular surgeon behind her resumed a conversation, this time with the woman in the window seat who had made the mistake of making eye contact. Sarah reclined her seat a fraction. She looked out across the aisle to the window rows. Clouds below. Sky above. That particular blue that exists only at altitude.
It was not a dramatic sound. That was the thing nobody would understand later. When they tried to reconstruct the sequence of events for investigators, for reporters, for the official record, they expected drama. They expected alarms, a shout, some cinematic signal that something had gone wrong. What they heard instead was a single dull impact. The sound of a body meeting a floor. Heavy, sudden, final. Sarah heard it at 6:22, cruising altitude, somewhere over southern Idaho. She was not asleep. She had been sitting with her eyes closed, but her mind was doing what it always did in still moments, running quietly through the day, noting what had been left unfinished, what could not be left unfinished, what no longer mattered. The medication error on bed 4, the woman in bed 6 who had no visitors, Mr. Fenton's drainage output chart that she had flagged for the morning, nurse with a note she hoped was clear enough. The impact came through the cabin floor. She felt it before she heard it. A vibration, brief, directional, forward, very forward, cockpit adjacent. She opened her eyes. Across the aisle, no one had reacted. The surgeon behind her was still talking. A child 3 rows back was watching something on a tablet, headphones on. The cabin was the specific kind of oblivious that long flights produce, a collective withdrawal from the immediate environment. Sarah unfastened her seatbelt. She did not stand yet. She sat forward slightly, weight on the balls of her feet, and listened. 4 seconds of nothing. Then the cockpit door opened. First Officer Diaz appeared in the galley. His face had a quality that Sarah recognized. Not panic, not yet, but the immediate predecessor to panic. The face of someone whose mind is still insisting that what just happened cannot have happened. He spoke to Monica in a voice too low to carry to the cabin. Monica's expression changed. She reached for the intercom handset immediately. Her voice came over the speakers a moment later, measured but with an audible effort behind the measure. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a situation on board that requires medical assistance. If there is a physician or any medical professional on this flight, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. She clicked off. The cabin shifted. Not panic, not immediately, but the particular alertness of 200 people suddenly paying attention to the same thing. Heads came up, earbuds were removed. The collective withdrawal reversed itself in seconds. The vascular surgeon stood up before the intercom message had fully finished. He was a large man, 6 feet and broad, with the bearing of someone accustomed to rooms deferring to him. He stepped into the aisle with the ease of a man answering a question he had been waiting his whole life to be asked. "I'm a surgeon," he said, loudly enough for the surrounding 6 rows to hear clearly. 14 years, vascular, take this. He was already moving toward the front of the cabin. Monica met him at the galley. There was a brief exchange. She nodded and stepped aside, and he moved through the cockpit door. Sarah watched him go. She sat still. A woman across the aisle leaned toward her husband and whispered something. The husband craned his neck toward the front. Behind Sarah, a teenager asked his mother what was happening. The mother said she didn't know. Sarah looked at her hands in her lap. She was running through a differential. The impact she had felt forward, heavy, sudden. No prior disturbance, no cry, no warning, no gradual noise of someone struggling. One moment, normal. Next moment, floor, cardiac event. The most probable explanation by significant margin. The hand to the chest, twice. The second time, he had held it there. She had filed that and thought nothing more of it. Because people touched their chests for dozens of reasons, most of them benign. This one had not been benign. She was estimating time. From the moment of impact to now, approximately 4 minutes. Every minute of delay in a cardiac arrest without intervention reduced survival probability by 7 to 10%. She stood up. Monica was in the galley when Sarah reached her. The cockpit door was half. Through it, Sarah could see the surgeon kneeling on the cockpit floor beside Captain Harris, who was on his back, unresponsive. Diaz was in the left seat, headset on, speaking to someone on the radio, his voice tight, controlled. The words clipped. The surgeon had 2 fingers pressed to Harris's neck, his head tilted, watching the captain's chest. Sarah stepped through the doorway. "Ma'am," Monica started. "I'm a nurse." She was already looking at Harris. "How long?" The surgeon looked up. His expression was not welcoming. "I have this." "How long has he been down?" "A beat. 4, 5 minutes. Maybe." Sarah crouched. She looked at Harris's face, the color, the jaw, the position of the head. She looked at his chest. Then she looked at the surgeon's hand position on the carotid. "He's in VFib," she said. "You don't know that. You'd need his color, his jaw, the absence of any respiratory effort, and the fact that your fingers are on the wrong part of the carotid." She was not looking at the surgeon when she said it. She was looking at Harris. "You're reading a pulse that isn't there." A silence. "I've been doing this for..." "Step back. Please." The please was not a courtesy. It was the final word before a boundary became physical. The surgeon heard it, something in the register of it, and shifted his weight. Sarah moved in. Her compressions were correct from the first one. Depth, rate, arm position, weight distribution. The geometry of effective CPR that most people perform incorrectly, even with training, because training is not the same as repetition, and repetition is not the same as doing it in conditions where it matters. She had done it in conditions where it mattered. Many times. "AAD," she said, not loudly, a word placed in the air with the expectation that it would be acted upon. Monica was already moving. She pulled the defibrillator from the aft cockpit storage panel and placed it beside Sarah without being asked twice. Sarah continued compressions with her left arm while her right hand opened the AED case. She placed the pad's left subclavian, right lower ribs, and let the machine analyze. Analyzing rhythm. "Do not touch the patient." Diaz, in the left seat, had turned his head. He was watching Sarah. The radio crackled. He turned back. "Eugene, approach. This is 7714, declaring an emergency. Shock advised. Stand clear." "Clear," Sarah said. The machine discharged. Harris's body responded with the brief involuntary contraction of a man being pulled back from somewhere. Sarah checked the carotid. A pulse. Faint, present. She sat back on her heels and let out a slow breath. One crisis, partially addressed. She became aware, in that moment, of a second thing, something she had been peripherally tracking since she entered the cockpit, and had not yet allowed herself to fully focus on. Diaz's voice on the radio, the airspeed indicator, the numbers. She turned her head and looked at the instrument panel fully for the first time. Her eyes moved across it in a pattern, not random, not curious, systematic. The way a person reads something they have read before, in a language they were once fluent in, and have not entirely forgotten. She looked for exactly 11 seconds. Then she looked at the back of Diaz's seat. The cockpit was quiet except for the radio and the sound of wind at altitude and Captain Harris. Breathing, barely, but breathing. The cockpit was small in the way that purposeful spaces are small. Everything in it existed because it needed to exist. Every switch, every display, every handle and dial and indicator light had a reason. And the reason was precise. And the precision was the point. There was no excess, no decoration, just function arranged in the specific geometry that allowed two people to manage a machine moving at 530 miles per hour through air that was 60 degrees below zero on the other side of a quarter-inch of aluminum. Sarah had always respected cockpits. She had spent a significant portion of her adult life in them. She did not think about that now. She filed it where she filed most things. Back, quiet, available if needed, and focused on Captain Harris. He was breathing at a rate of approximately 10 breaths per minute. Shallow. The rhythm was irregular enough to be concerning, but regular enough to be monitored, rather than immediately intervened upon. His color had moved from the gray-blue of a man in full cardiac arrest toward something closer to pale. Not good, but better. Significantly better than 4 minutes ago. His eyes were closed. Sarah took his radial pulse. It was present. Weak. 42 beats per minute, which was low but not catastrophically so, given that the AED had just reset his rhythm, and his body was in the immediate aftermath of an event. She performed a rapid neurological check. Pupils, response to light, response to verbal stimulus. His left pupil was slightly more reactive than the right. She noted it, did not conclude from it yet. Too early. She looked around the cockpit floor. A half-consumed bottle of water near the base of the right seat. The captain's headset, displaced in the fall. A pen. She picked up the headset, set it on the console within Diaz's reach. The surgeon had not left. He was standing in the cockpit doorway, filling it, with the expression of a man recalibrating his position in a situation that had shifted beneath him. He was not stupid. Sarah could see that. He was a competent physician in his own domain, but his domain was an operating theater, not a cockpit floor at 38,000 feet, and competence in one context did not automatically transfer to another. His pressure needs to be checked, the surgeon said. There was something careful in his voice now. The authority had not left it entirely, but it had been adjusted. I know. Sarah looked at Monica, who was standing just behind the surgeon. Do you have a blood pressure cuff in the medical kit? Yes, please. Monica had disappeared. The surgeon stepped slightly to the side to let her pass, which meant he was also, slightly, stepping out of the doorway. Sarah noted this without acknowledgement. What's your read? The surgeon asked. His voice had changed again. Less performance in it now. More genuine question. Possible inferior me. Could be arrhythmia with a secondary event. Without an ECG I can't confirm rhythm. She was checking Harris's airway as she spoke. Clear. The AED analysis suggested ventricular fibrillation. We've restored a rhythm. The priority now is maintaining it and monitoring for re-entry. A pause. You've done this before, the surgeon said. It was not really a question. Sarah did not answer it. Monica returned with the medical kit. A hard-sided orange case. Standard airline configuration. Sarah opened it efficiently. Blood pressure cuff. Stethoscope. Basic medications. Oxygen mask. Pulse oximeter. She fitted the pulse oximeter to Harris's right index finger. Oxygen saturation. 91% low. She opened the oxygen supply from the cockpit's emergency system, a separate line from the cabin masks, and fitted the mask over Harris's face. She watched the number. It climbed slowly. 93, 94. She wrapped the blood pressure cuff and inflated it. Systolic 88. Diastolic 54. Low, but holding. We need to get him to a hospital, the surgeon said from the doorway. Yes, Sarah said. How long to Portland? Neither she nor Diaz answered immediately. Diaz was on the radio. His voice had the controlled quality of someone managing a large amount of internal noise, while producing an external product that could not reflect that noise. He was doing it adequately. Not well. There was a tightness in his phrasing. A fractional delay before each transmission that told Sarah his processing was burdened, but adequately. She listened to what he was saying. Denver Center, 7714 emergency. We are declaring medical emergency on board, requesting priority handling and routing to nearest suitable airport. Captain is incapacitated. First officer has control. Over a pause. Static. 7714. Denver Center copies your emergency. Stand by for routing options. What are your souls on board and fuel state? Diaz checked the fuel display. 214 souls. Fuel state is a brief pause as he read the gauge. Approximately 4.6 hours remaining. Over. Copy 7714. We're looking at Eugene, Oregon, as your nearest option. Approximately 42 minutes at current speed and altitude. Eugene approach will be advised. Can you confirm crew status? Do you have a qualified first officer on the controls? Affirm. Denver Center. First Officer Diaz. Fully qualified. I have the aircraft. Copy. Turn right, heading to descend and maintain flight level 2. Eugene will have emergency services standing by. Right heading to 70. Descending to flight level 2. 7714. Diaz reached for the autopilot heading selector with his right hand. His hand was not entirely steady. Sarah saw it. She said nothing about it. Not yet. She turned back to Harris. His saturation was at 96 now. Better, his blood pressure had not moved significantly. Still low. Still concerning, but not actively crashing. His breathing had regulated slightly. The rhythm the AED had established was holding. She had done what could be done with what was available. That was the core of field medicine. And that was what this was. Regardless of the altitude. You assessed with what you had. You intervened with what was available. You monitored with the same tools you'd already used. And you accepted that some things could not be solved in the field and required only to be preserved until a better environment was reachable. Harris needed a catheterization lab. She could not give him one at 38,000 feet. She could give him oxygen, a maintained rhythm, a monitored blood pressure, and time. She was giving him all for. The surgeon cleared his throat. I can monitor him from here, he said. If you need to, he gestured vaguely toward the cabin. Sarah looked at the instrument panel. She did it without deciding to. Her eyes simply went there. The way eyes go to a source of light in a dark room. The altimeter was reading the descent. Flight level 240 coming up. The airspeed was at 290 knots indicated. The heading had moved to 275. Diaz had slightly over-rotated and was correcting back. The vertical speed indicator showed a descent rate of 1,800 feet per minute. She ran the numbers without meaning to. 42 minutes to Eugene. At this descent profile, they would be at a manageable altitude in approximately 18 minutes. Whether over Eugene, she didn't have it yet, but she would ask. She looked at Diaz. His shoulders were tight. The set of them was wrong. Too high, too close to his ears. A man holding his body against something. She stood up from the cockpit floor. The surgeon stepped back to let her past him. She stepped past him. Then, she stopped. She turned back and looked at the instrument panel one more time. Her eyes moved across it in the same systematic pattern as before. Left to right, top to bottom, primary flight display, navigation display, engine instruments, fuel, hydraulics, electrical. 11 seconds. Then she turned to Diaz. What's your approach speed for Eugene? She asked. Her voice was quiet, not casual, specific. The question of someone who needed a specific number. Diaz turned his head. He looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. His expression was the expression of a man encountering something unexpected in a moment. When unexpected things were already in excess. Why? He said. Sarah held his gaze. She did not answer the question. She waited. Diaz stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he turned back to his instruments. Ref +5, he said, almost despite himself. 1-30-8 knots for this weight. Sarah nodded once. She filed the number. She walked back out into the galley. Monica was waiting. Her composure was intact. Professionally. Thoroughly intact. But her eyes asked a question. Her training didn't allow her mouth to form. Sarah answered the unspoken version. He's stable. For now. She looked at the closed cabin door. The sound of the passengers was audible through it. A low, mixed register of anxiety and unanswered questions. How is the cabin? Nervous. Mr. the surgeon told the people around him that the pilot had a heart attack. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Is that a problem? Monica asked. It means they know we have one pilot, Sarah said. And right now, one pilot is managing an emergency landing approach while his hands aren't entirely steady. Monica absorbed this. What do I tell them? The truth. Calmly, Captain Harris has had a medical event. First Officer Diaz has full control of the aircraft. Emergency services will be ready in Eugene. She paused. Don't mention the hands. Monica nodded. Sarah looked at the cockpit door. I need to go back in, she said. Before you go back in, Monica said, I need to understand who you are. It was not an unreasonable request. Monica had spent the last 11 minutes watching a woman in hospital scrubs correct a licensed surgeon's clinical judgment, run a cardiac resuscitation with the calm precision of someone who had done it more times than she could count, and then walk into a cockpit and ask a first officer a very specific aviation question in a very specific tone. None of that was nurse behavior. Not entirely. I'm a nurse, Sarah said. Registered, Memorial Regional Denver, surgical recovery. That's not what I'm asking. Sarah looked at her for a moment. Monica's face held no hostility, only the particular fatigue of someone managing a crisis who had just discovered a variable she hadn't accounted for and needed, urgently, to understand its shape. What are you asking? Sarah said. I'm asking how a nurse knows an approach speed. A beat of silence between them. Behind Monica, through the small window in the cockpit door, Sarah could see Diaz's shoulders still too high, still holding tension that would cost him precision when precision mattered most. I used to fly, Sarah said. Used to? A long time ago. Monica waited for more. Sarah did not give more. It wasn't withholding for the sake of withholding. It was economy. There was a finite amount of time before Eugene. And every sentence spent explaining her history was a sentence not spent solving the problem in front of them. Bring me the emergency procedures binder, Sarah said instead. The one from the flight attendant station. Monica hesitated one more second. The hesitation of a professional deciding whether to push further, and then went to get it. The binder was standard airline issue. Laminated pages. Tabbed sections. The specific bureaucratic density of a document written by lawyers and revised by pilots. Sarah opened it at the nursing station jump seat and read through the sections on flight deck incapacitation, single pilot operations, and emergency diversion procedures. She read quickly, but completely. Not skimming, absorbing. She was looking for one specific thing. Whether the airline's procedures allowed a non-crew member into the flight deck during an emergency, and under what conditions. The answer, buried in a subsection titled Emergency Assistance, Qualified Persons, was more permissive than she'd expected. In the event of flight deck incapacitation, the pilot in command, or, in this case, the pilot flying, had discretionary authority to accept assistance from any person reasonably believed to have relevant qualifications, at their sole judgment, for the safety of the flight. At their sole judgment. That meant Diaz. Not Monica. Not the airline. Not Sarah's own claim about herself. Diaz would have to decide to let her in, and he would have to decide it while flying a commercial aircraft with an unconscious captain on the floor behind him. At a moment when trust in strangers was, understandably, in short supply, the radio crackled through the open cockpit door, audible in fragments from where Sarah sat. 714, Denver Center. Be advised Eugene approach reports crosswind conditions on runway 16. Currently, 340 at gusting 35. Sarah's head came up. Crosswind, 28 knots, gusting. She did the calculation instantly. The way arithmetic happens for people who have done it 10,000 times before. For a runway-oriented 16, a wind from 340 was nearly perpendicular. That put the crosswind component close to the full wind value. Somewhere in the range of 20 to 30 knots of pure crosswind on landing. That was significant. For an experienced captain in a 737, difficult but manageable. For a first officer who she didn't know his total hours, but his age and bearing suggested a pilot perhaps 5 to 7 years into his career, likely with a demonstrated crosswind limitation for solo operations well below 30 knots. It was a different problem entirely. She stood up and walked to the cockpit door. She did not knock immediately. She stood in the doorway and listened. Diaz was finishing his transmission. Copy Eugene wins, 714. His voice had a fractional strain in it that had not been there 11 minutes earlier. He set the radio down and exhaled through his nose. His hand went briefly to his forehead. Diaz, he turned. Seeing her again produced a flicker of something. Not quite irritation. Not quite relief. A complicated middle thing. I told you, I don't. What's your personal minimum for crosswind landings? Not the aircraft limit. Yours. He stared at her. That's not your business. It's about to be everyone's business if you crosswind is 30 knots and you've never landed one solo above 22. She said it without cruelty. Flat. A fact laid on a table. I'm not asking to embarrass you. I'm asking because I need to know what we're working with. Diaz's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought he would order her out of the cockpit. Entirely, she saw the shape of that decision cross his face and nearly land. Instead, something else happened. His shoulders dropped, fractionally, not relaxation. Surrender to a fact he could not keep hidden. 22, he said quietly. That's the highest I've done alone. With a Czech airman next to me. Never 35 gusting. Okay. It's not okay. Harris was supposed to be flying this leg. I was going to fly the return. His voice had an edge now, thin and close to breaking. I've never done an emergency diversion. I've never flown with a... He gestured behind him, toward Harris, unable to finish the sentence. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. You're going to fly this approach, she said. You're a qualified pilot, and this is your aircraft. I'm not here to take that from you. Then why are you here? Because you don't have to do it with an empty right seat. It was at that moment that the surgeon reappeared behind her in the galley, having apparently decided that his professional obligation to Harris permitted him to also involve himself in whatever was happening at the front of the aircraft. What is she doing? He said to Monica, not to Sarah, as though Sarah were a phenomenon to be discussed rather than addressed. She's assisting the first officer, Monica said. She's a nurse. The surgeon's voice had climbed slightly, and Sarah recognized in it something she'd heard before in hospital corridors. The particular anxiety of a competent person confronted with the limits of his own competence, converting that anxiety into an assertion of hierarchy. I don't know what she thinks she's doing up there, but she is not a pilot. Sir, Monica started. I have 214 people back there, the surgeon said. Louder now. Loud enough that heads in the front rows of the cabin turned toward the sound, and I am not going to stand here while a nurse plays co-pilot. The word landed in the cabin like a dropped tray. Sarah felt the ripple of it behind her, the specific quality of silence that precedes a wave of whispered questions. She did not turn around. Diaz, in the cockpit, had gone very still. Sarah turned to face the surgeon directly, for the first time since the cockpit door had opened. I understand your concern, she said, quiet enough that only he, Monica, and Diaz could hear it clearly. You don't know me. You have no reason to trust me beyond what you've watched me do for the last 15 minutes. That's fair. The surgeon opened his mouth. But right now, Sarah continued, the choice in front of us is not between a qualified pilot and me. It's between a first officer flying a crosswind landing alone in an aircraft he's never landed solo in conditions like this, or that same first officer flying it with someone beside him who has relevant experience. Those are the only two options on the table. I'd like you to go sit down and let Monica manage the cabin. Can you do that? It was not a request shaped like a question, though it ended in one. The surgeon looked at her. Really looked. The way people look when they are recalibrating an assessment they'd made too quickly, and then, without another word, turned and walked back toward his seat. Monica exhaled. I have 214 people to keep calm, she said to Sarah. What do I tell them now? Tell them the flight crew is stable and in control of the situation. Sarah said, it's true. She turned back to the cockpit. Diaz was watching her through the open door. I have 2,200 hours, Sarah said, stepping through. Twin engine and heavy aircraft. Before the hospital. I'm not a nurse first. I haven't sat in a cockpit in over 4 years. And I am not current. And I am not asking you to hand me the controls. She sat down in the jump seat behind him. I'm asking you to let me help you fly this. Diaz looked at her for 3 long seconds. Then he reached over and clicked the cockpit door lock into place. Strap in, he said. The jump seat behind the first officer's position was not designed for comfort. It was designed for function. A fold-down perch meant for Czech airmen. Instructors, or, in rare cases, exactly this, an emergency extra set of hands. Sarah pulled the harness across her chest and shoulders, clicked it into place, and adjusted her headset from the hook beside the seat. Static filled her right ear. Then Diaz's voice, tight, professional, running through his transmission with Denver Center. She listened without speaking. Harris lay on the cockpit floor, between the 2 seats. Oxygen mask fitted, monitored now by a simple pulse oximeter, clipped to his finger that Sarah could see from her position, 95%. Holding, his breathing had settled into something close to regular, not conscious, not stable in the deeper sense, but not actively dying, which at 38,000 feet, 40 minutes from anywhere, was the best outcome currently available. Sarah kept one eye on the oximeter, reading throughout everything that followed. The rest of her attention went to the panel. Talk me through what you have, she said to Diaz, once his transmission with Denver Center finished. I have the aircraft, he said. It was reflexive. the phrase pilots used to confirm control. But there was something underneath it now, a small defiance, a reminder to himself as much as to her. I know you do. I'm not asking for a handoff. I'm asking what you're seeing. A pause. Then, slowly, he began, we're descending through flight level 280. Target 240 initially. Then further, as Eugene approach sequences us in airspeed 290, throttling back as we descend. Winds at Eugene are the problem. 340 at 28. Gusting through. That's close to max demonstrated crosswind for the aircraft type, and well above anything I've done solo. What's the runway length? Runway 16 right. 8,000 feet. It's long enough. Length isn't the issue. Good. Length not being the issue simplifies things. What's your fuel state? 3.9 hours remaining at current burn, so no fuel pressure. You have options if the first approach doesn't work. Diaz exhaled. It was the first time since she'd sat down that his exhale had sounded like something other than held tension being managed. I hadn't thought about it that way. Think about it that way. A missed approach isn't a failure. It's a tool. If the crosswind is too much on the first attempt, you go around. You request a different runway configuration if one exists, or you hold and wait for the gusts to settle. You are not required to land on the first try. Most pilots forget that when they're under pressure. Diaz nodded, slow, absorbing it. The radio crackled again. 714. Eugene approach. Descend and maintain 8,000. Turn left heading 22. Vector for the ILS 16 right approach. Left 22. Descending 8,714. Diaz responded. He banked the aircraft into the turn. Sarah watched the attitude indicator, the turn coordinator, the rate of the roll. Smooth, controlled. Whatever else was happening internally for Diaz, his hands, at least in straight and level maneuvering, were still capable. The problem would come later, closer to the ground, when the margins narrowed and the wind stopped being an abstraction on a display and became something physical, pushing against 40 tons of aircraft at 140 feet above a runway. Can I ask you something? Diaz said, eyes still on his instruments. Go ahead. What were you? Before the hospital. Sarah was quiet for a moment. Behind her, through the cockpit door now locked, she could hear the low murmur of the cabin, punctuated occasionally by Monica's voice over the intercom. Measured, delivering updates that contained exactly as much truth as was useful, and no more. Military, she said. A long time ago. What did you fly? Rotary, initially, then special operations support, mostly. Some medevac. Diaz absorbed this without turning his head, which she respected. He kept his attention on the aircraft even while processing the information, which told her something about his underlying discipline that the tension in his shoulders had been obscuring. You said 2,200 hours. That's accurate. That's not nothing. No, but it's not current, either. I haven't touched a yoke in 4 years. Everything I know is memory, not muscle. That's why I'm not taking the controls from you. I don't trust my own hands right now the way I trust yours. It was, she understood even as she said it, not entirely true. Or rather, it was true in the way that useful simplifications are true. Her hands would remember more than she was admitting. But Diaz needed to hear that this was his aircraft, his authority, his landing. Because a man who believed he had been quietly replaced would fly worse than a man who believed he was being supported. Authority mattered less than confidence. In a cockpit, she had learned that a long time ago. Somewhere else. In circumstances she did not intend to discuss with a first officer over Oregon. Behind her, a soft groan. Sarah turned immediately. Harris's eyes were moving beneath closed lids, not consciousness. Not yet, but a shift in depth. She checked the oximeter. 94%. Stable. She checked his pulse at the wrist. 58 beats per minute now. Improved from 4. He's stabilizing, she said, mostly to herself. Then louder, to Diaz. Your captain is going to be okay. Not conscious yet, but trending the right direction. Diaz's shoulders dropped a fraction at that. Relief finding a small space to exist in, even in the middle of everything else. He trained me, Diaz said quietly. 2 years ago, my first year on the 737. He's the reason he stopped himself. Cleared his throat. Sorry. Not relevant. It's relevant, Sarah said. It's why your hands are shaking. That's not weakness. That's a man watching someone who matters to him nearly die on the floor of his own workplace while also being asked to land a plane in a crosswind he's never handled alone. Anyone's hands would shake. Yours don't seem to be shaking. Mine did the first 50 times I was in a situation like this. She said it plainly, without performance. They stopped because I did it enough times that my body learned it wasn't going to kill me, even when it felt like it might. That's not a gift. That's repetition. You'll get there. Today isn't about getting there. Today is about landing the plane with the experience you have, plus whatever I can add. 7:14. Eugene approach. Turn left, heading 16. Descend and maintain 4000. Cleared ILs 16 right approach. Contact tower at the outer marker. Left 16. 4000. Cleared ILS 16. 7:14. Diaz made the turn. The aircraft began its final descent sequence. And through the windscreen, the cloud layer thickened gray, textured, the world beyond the glass, reduced to shifting vapor. Sarah felt the first shudder of turbulence pass through the airframe. There it is, she said. That's the surface wind starting to reach us. It'll get worse as we descend. Then it'll get worse again, inside 1,000 feet. Don't fight every gust individually. You'll overcorrect and chase it. Anticipate the trend, not the instant. How do you anticipate a gust? You don't anticipate the gust. You anticipate the pattern. Watch your attitude indicator more than your instinct. Your inner ear will lie to you in this kind of turbulence. The instrument won't. Diaz nodded, jaw tight, eyes locked on the panel. At that moment, the intercom buzzed. Monica, calling from the cabin. Sarah picked it up. Go ahead. The passenger, the surgeon, he's telling people around him that a flight attendant let a random woman into the cockpit, and that he thinks she might be some kind of... Monica's voice hesitated. He used the word hijacker. It's a small group of people right now, but it's getting louder. I don't know how much longer I can keep it contained without a real answer. Sarah closed her eyes briefly. Of course, fear needed a shape, and a locked cockpit door with a stranger inside, it was an easy shape for fear to take. However, inaccurate. Tell them the truth, Sarah said. Tell them I'm a retired military pilot assisting the crew. At the first officer's request, under airline emergency procedures, tell them the door is locked because that is standard security protocol during any flight deck emergency, not because anything is wrong beyond what they already know. Is that going to be enough? It's the truth. It's usually enough. Eventually, if it isn't, that's a problem for after we're on the ground. She hung up the handset. Diaz glanced sideways at her, the first real look he'd given her since she'd sat down. Something had shifted in his face. Not full trust, but the specific quality of a person recalculating who they were dealing with. And finding the recalculation, on balance, reassuring. Retired military pilot, he repeated. Something like that. That's not a full answer. No, Sarah agreed. It isn't. The aircraft shuddered again, harder this time, as it descended through 6,000 feet into the thickening turbulence below the cloud layer, and outside the windscreen. The gray world gave no indication yet of where the ground might be. The radio call came at 4,000 feet, 12 miles from the outer marker, and it changed everything. 7:14, Eugene Tower. Be advised, runway 16 right is temporarily closed. We have an emergency vehicle disabled on the runway surface. Ground crew is working to clear it. Estimated time unknown. Suggest you enter a holding pattern at the Josha intersection, 5,000 feet. Standard right turns. Advise fuel state. Diaz's hand froze on the throttle quadrant for a fraction of a second. Small, but Sarah saw it. Copy Eugene Tower. Stand by. He looked at Sarah. Did you hear that? I heard it. She was already thinking through the fuel math. The same calculation Diaz was running, but faster. Because she wasn't also flying the aircraft while doing it. You have 3.6 hours of fuel. A hold costs you time, not survival. Ask him for a realistic estimate on the runway clearance before you commit to holding. If it's 15 minutes, hold. If it's unknown, you need a second option in your pocket. Diaz K-Yed, the radio. Eugene Tower, 7:14. Request estimate on runway clearance time. We have a medical emergency on board and would like to minimize hold time if possible. A pause, longer than Sarah liked. 7:14. Tower, unable to provide firm estimate at this time. Vehicle appears to have a mechanical failure. We're working a tow. Recommend you consider alternate airport if your fuel state allows. Portland International is available. ILS runway to left. Current winds 290 at 18. Much more favorable crosswind component. Sarah felt something settle in her chest. Not relief exactly, but the specific clarity that comes when a bad option is replaced by a worse sounding but actually better one. Take Portland, she said immediately. Diaz looked at her. That's another 40 minutes. Harris is stable and would rather land in 18 knots of crosswind than have you attempt 35 in a runway you might not even get onto in time. This isn't a hard call, Diaz. Portland has favorable winds, a longer runway, and a level eye trauma center 20 minutes closer to downtown than Eugene's hospital. Take it. Diaz exhaled through his nose. The sound of a decision being made and accepted in the same breath. Eugene Tower, 714, will divert to Portland International, requesting handoff to Portland approach. Copy 714. Stand by for handoff, and good luck. The next several minutes were consumed by the mechanics of a second diversion, new routing, new radio frequencies, new approach plates that Diaz had to pull up on his electronic flight bag, while simultaneously flying the aircraft through moderate turbulence at 11,000 feet. The cloud deck, now a solid gray mass, pressing against the windscreen on all sides. Sarah kept her attention split three ways. The instrument panel, Harris on the floor, and Diaz's hands. Harris's condition had plateaued, rather than continuing to improve. Oxygen saturation steady, at 94, pulse steady, at 58, still unconscious but breathing without significant distress. Plateaus were not always good news in cardiac cases. But given the circumstances and the tools available, it was the best plateau they could reasonably hope for. Diaz's hands were the more urgent concern. She watched him make a small, avoidable error, descending slightly faster than the profile called for, chasing the vertical speed indicator instead of flying a stabilized descent. It was the kind of mistake tired, stressed pilots made, constantly overcorrecting in one dimension because the mind, overloaded, narrows its focus to whatever feels most urgent in the moment, rather than what actually is. Pitch up, Sarah said. 6 words. Flat. Immediate. Power. You're ahead of it. Diaz's eyes flicked to the vertical speed indicator, minus 2,400 feet per minute, steeper than the 1,800 the profile called for, and he made the correction, easing the nose up fractionally, adding a touch of power to arrest the excess rate of descent. The aircraft steadied. Thank you, he said. Quiet, genuine. You'll catch it yourself next time. You're tired. Tired pilots fixate. That's not a character flaw, it's physiology. I'm just an extra set of eyes. Portland approach picked them up at 9,000 feet and began sequencing them toward runway 2. The winds, as promised, were more favorable. 290 at 18 knots. A manageable crosswind component, well within Diaz's demonstrated capability, even solo, even exhausted. But the weather itself had not cooperated. A low ceiling, reported at 600 feet, meant this would not be a visual approach. It would be flown on instruments, on faith in the numbers, down through cloud that would not release its grip on visibility until the aircraft was very close to the ground. Close enough that a wrong call, discovered too late, would leave no time to correct. Have you flown a low visibility ILS-2 minimums before? Sarah asked. Twice, with a Czech airman both times. Then you've done it. This is the third time. The airplane doesn't know the difference between a Czech airman in that seat and me in this one. It only knows what the instruments tell it and what you do with the controls. Diaz's jaw was tight, but he nodded. It was somewhere around 3,000 feet, descending into the cloud layer proper, visibility dropping to near zero outside the windscreen. That a passenger near the front of the cabin, a middle-aged woman in seat 3C, traveling alone, who had been watching the cockpit door with the particular fixation of someone, trying to make sense of a day that had stopped, making sense some time ago, happened to catch a glimpse through the small window in the door as a flight attendant passed briefly in front of it. She saw, for perhaps 2 seconds, the interior of the cockpit. She saw Diaz in the left seat, hands on the yoke, eyes locked forward. She saw, in the jump seat behind him, a woman sitting upright, calm, headset on, watching the instruments with an expression of complete and total stillness, not the stillness of fear, and not the stillness of someone doing something unfamiliar for the first time, the stillness of someone entirely at home. The woman in 3 Celsius said nothing to the passengers around her. She simply sat back in her seat, and for reasons she could not have articulated even to herself, felt, for the first time since the intercom announcement 40 minutes earlier, something close to calm. At 2,000 feet, wind shear hit the aircraft without warning. It came from the northwest, a sudden shift in the air mass that pressed against the fuselage and produced, in the space of 2 seconds, a 15-knot loss of airspeed, followed immediately by a correction that threatened to overshoot the other direction. The aircraft yaw rolled slightly and dropped 40 feet in altitude before Diaz's hands, reflexively, began fighting to correct it. His correction was too aggressive. He overcorrected the roll, which induced a secondary oscillation. And for a moment, 1.5 seconds, no more, the aircraft was genuinely unstable, wallowing between 2 competing inputs, neither of which was quite right. Diaz. Sarah's voice cut through. Level. Immediate. Wings level. Trust the horizon, not your arm. Small inputs, he heard her. Something in him trained. Buried under panic, but present. responded to the voice more than the words, and his hands eased. The roll settled. The aircraft steadied, still descending, still on the localizer, shaken, but recovering. "That's it," Sarah said. "That's the shear. It'll settle. You're through the worst of it." Behind them, on the floor, Harris's oxygen mask had shifted slightly with the movement. Sarah reached down without breaking her attention from the panel and adjusted it back into place, her hand finding it by feel alone. 714, Portland Tower. You are cleared to land runway. To white left wind. To white 16, gusting 22. Cleared to land to 8 left. 714, Diaz responded, and his voice, Sarah noted, had changed in the last 90 seconds. Still tense, still tight, but underneath the tension now, something that had not been there before. The specific quality of a person who had been tested by something sudden and unexpected, and had not broken. He had wobbled. He had not broken. That distinction, Sarah knew, mattered more than anything else that would happen in the next 90 seconds. Ahead, through the windscreen, the gray began, almost imperceptibly at first, to lighten. A suggestion of texture in the cloud. Then, all at once, the ceiling broke, and the ground appeared beneath them. Wet runway. Approach lights strobing in sequence toward the threshold. Emergency vehicles already visible, lined up along the taxiway with lights flashing, waiting. 1,000 feet, 500. You have this, Sarah said quietly. Fly the airplane you've been flying for the last 40 minutes. Nothing changes now. Diaz did not answer. His hands, for the first time since Sarah had sat down behind him, were steady. 200 feet. The runway was fully visible now. Wet asphalt, center-line lights blurring past through streaks of rain on the windscreen. The approach lighting system strobing its sequence toward the threshold in white pulses that counted down the last seconds before. Touchdown like a metronome nobody had asked for. Diaz's hands were on the yoke, his feet on the rudder pedals, his eyes moving in the disciplined scan he had been taught years ago and had performed 1,000 times since, in conditions that had never included an unconscious captain on the floor behind him and a stranger with unexplained 2,200 hours in the jump seat. He was flying it. He was flying it well. And then, at 140 feet, the wind shear returned. It came without the courtesy of warning this time. No gradual build-up. No telltale shift in the instruments that might have given a fraction of a second to prepare. It arrived as a single violent gust from the northwest, striking the aircraft broadside, and the machine yawed hard to the left, the nose swinging off the extended center line by nearly 10 degrees in under a second. The stall warning did not sound. They were not close to a stall, but the aircraft's flight path, in that instant, no longer aligned with the runway at all. It was tracking toward the grass on the left side of the threshold, and at 140 feet with a wet runway and a barely recovering captain and 214 people behind a locked door, there was very little room left to fix it. Diaz's hands moved. They moved in the wrong direction, not through error of judgment, through the specific, involuntary failure that happens to a human nervous system. When it has spent 45 minutes managing a crisis, it was never trained to manage alone, and is then asked, at the exact moment when precision matters more than at any other point in the flight, to produce one more correct decision under one more layer of load. His right hand pulled the yoke in a direction that would have deepened the yaw rather than correcting it. Sarah saw it happen in real time, not as a sequence of separate observations, but as a single continuous read of the aircraft's attitude, the yoke position, and Diaz's hand, all arriving in her mind at once. The way a single sentence arrives whole, rather than word by word. She had perhaps 3/4 of a second to decide. She did not spend all of it deciding. I have the aircraft, she said, not a request, not a suggestion. The exact phrase used in every cockpit in the world to mean precisely one thing. Control was changing hands. Immediately, without discussion. Her hands were already moving before the sentence finished. She reached past him, not pushing him aside, but taking the yoke with her right hand, while her left found the rudder pedals were beyond her reach from the jump seat, which meant she could not fully take the aircraft. She could only override the immediate input, and by the half-second needed for the correct one. She rolled the wings back toward level. She fed an opposite rudder pressure through the only channel available to her, calling it aloud, sharp, immediate, right rudder. Now Diaz's feet responded before his conscious mind caught up, the trained reflex beneath. The panic responding to the command even as the panic itself was still resolving. His right foot pressed the pedal. The nose swung back toward the set. The aircraft, for 1.5 seconds, was flown by both of them at once. Her hands correcting the roll, her voice commanding the rudder, his feet obeying. his hands slowly coming back under his own control as the aircraft steadied. And the immediate crisis passed from unrecoverable to merely difficult. "Centerline," Sarah said. "You have it. Fly it down." She released the yoke. Her hands returned to her lap. 41 seconds, start to finish. From the first gust to the moment she let go. Not once had she taken full control. Not once had she flown the airplane alone. She had corrected an error mid-formation and handed it back the instant it was correctable. Because the landing, on this runway, in front of these people, needed to belong to Diaz. And because an aircraft flown by two sets of uncoordinated hands for longer than absolutely necessary was more dangerous than one flown imperfectly by one committed pilot. Diaz flew the last 140 feet alone. The main gear touched down first. A firm contact, not smooth, not the gentle kiss of a perfect landing, but solid and controlled, and precisely on the center line. The nose gear settled a half-second later. Diaz brought the thrust reversers up, felt the deceleration, pressed them all forward against their harnesses, and began braking firm, even, competent. The aircraft slowed. 60 knots. 40-20. It rolled to a stop with the emergency vehicles already converging from both sides of the runway, lights strobing red and white against the wet tarmac, sirens audible even through the aircraft's hull. For a moment, nobody in the cockpit spoke. Diaz's hands were still on the controls, gripping them the way a person grips something after nearly losing it. His chest was rising and falling in quick, shallow breaths. Sarah watched him for a moment, said nothing, let him have the silence. Then he turned his head and looked at her. "You had it," he said. His voice was unsteady, in a completely different way than it had been 40 minutes earlier. Not fear now. Something closer to disbelief. "For a second there, you had the controls." "For a second," Sarah agreed. "You had the rest of it. You flew that landing. I almost put us in the grass. You didn't. Because of you. Because of both of us." She unclipped her harness. Behind her, Harris stirred again, a low sound. Closer to consciousness than anything he'd produced in the last 45 minutes. Sarah moved to him immediately, checking his pulse, his color, the oximeter, 96%. "Improving. Your captain is coming around. Get on the radio and tell ground control we need medical personnel at the aircraft door immediately, not the jetway, the door." Diaz, still breathing hard, nodded and reached for the radio. The next several minutes moved with the particular chaos of a crisis reaching its resolution. A controlled chaos. Professional in its own way, but chaos nonetheless. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft on the taxiway. A mobile stairway was brought to the forward door, rather than waiting for a jetway connection. Paramedics boarded within 90 seconds of the aircraft coming to a full stop, moving through the galley with a gurney and a portable monitor, and Sarah gave them a handoff report with the clean, efficient precision of someone who had given 1,000 handoff reports before on set time. Interventions performed, current vitals, medication administered none, response to current oxygen saturation, current pulse. The lead paramedic, a woman perhaps 10 years older than Sarah, listened to the entire report without interrupting once, nodded at the end, and said only, "Good work." They moved Harris onto the gurney and out through the forward door, down the stairs, into a waiting ambulance whose doors closed within 90 seconds of his exit from the aircraft. Sarah watched from the cockpit doorway as the ambulance pulled away, lights flashing, siren rising as it cleared the taxiway. She let out a breath she hadn't fully realized she'd been holding. Diaz remained in the left seat for a long moment after the passengers began their slow, subdued deplaning through the rear exits. Protocol requiring the forward door and stairs to remain clear for emergency access. He sat with his hands resting in his lap, no longer on the controls, staring out through the windscreen at the wet runway and the gray Portland sky beyond it. Sarah stood in the cockpit doorway, not entering fully, giving him the space that a moment like this required. "You okay?" she asked. He didn't answer immediately. "I don't know," he said finally. Nobody trains you for this. They train you for engine failures, decompression, single-engine landings. Nobody trains you for watching your captain collapse and then flying his airplane through weather you've never handled alone." "No," Sarah agreed. "Nobody trains you for that specifically. They train you for the version of it that's survivable, and hope the training generalizes. It generalized today. You flew that airplane, Diaz. From the moment Harris went down until the wheels touched, you never stopped flying it. That's the whole job. Not doing it perfectly. Doing it." He looked at her. "You could have taken it," he said. "The whole approach. You clearly could have flown that better than I did. Maybe not. I told you, I'm not current. But that's not the point. The point was never whether I could fly it better. The point was that this was your aircraft, your license, your captain, your responsibility. My job was to make sure you didn't have to do it with nothing behind you. That's a different job than flying the plane. Diaz was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, he said finally. I don't know what else to say. Thank you. You don't need to say anything else. She stepped back to let him finish his shutdown checklist. The long, methodical list of switches and confirmations that brought a commercial aircraft from a live, operating machine to a dormant one. Safe to leave, safe to walk away from. She watched him work through it, his hands steady now. His voice, when he spoke into the intercom to confirm completion with ground crew, level and clear. Whatever had broken in him for those 41 seconds over the threshold had not stayed broken. That, she thought, was the part that actually mattered. Sarah walked back out through the cockpit door into a cabin that was 3/4 empty.
Passengers filing slowly down the aisle toward the rear exit, murmuring, some crying quietly with relief, several stopping near the galley to look at her. The woman who had gone into the cockpit, the woman the surgeon had called a hijacker 40 minutes earlier, and who had apparently done something else entirely. She did not meet many of their eyes. She was tired in the specific way that comes not from physical exertion, but from the sustained output of total attention. The kind of tired that made her limbs feel slightly unfamiliar, slightly delayed in their response to her own commands. She found her seat, 14C, still there, her duffel bag still in the overhead bin, untouched, as though it belonged to a completely different flight than the one that had just happened. She sat down. She closed her eyes. Outside, through the small oval window, Portland's gray afternoon carried on as though nothing at all had happened above it 40 minutes earlier.
The FAA investigators boarded within 20 minutes of the aircraft reaching its gate. Not the standard gate, but a remote stand near the emergency vehicle staging area, where the aircraft had been towed after the runway was cleared for other traffic. 2 men and a woman, all in plain business attire with laminated credentials clipped to their jackets, moved through the cabin with clipboards and quiet, procedural voices, speaking first to Monica, then to the remaining passengers, then toward the cockpit. Sarah remained in her seat through all of it. She had already given her name to Monica, along with her contact information, understanding that some form of follow-up was inevitable. Beyond that, she had done what she always did when a crisis resolved. She made herself small, unremarkable, a woman in blue scrubs, sitting quietly near the back of a mostly empty cabin, waiting for permission to leave. Outside, on the tarmac, visible through her window, a small commotion had gathered near the base of the boarding stairs. The vascular surgeon, the man who had 45 minutes earlier called her a hijacker in front of 6 rows of frightened passengers, was speaking animatedly to a local news crew that had somehow already assembled at the private aviation gate, drawn by the emergency vehicle response visible from the highway. Sarah could not hear what he was saying. She did not need to. She could see the shape of it in his gestures, his hand pressed to his own chest, demonstrating compressions, his other hand sweeping toward the aircraft behind him. I managed the medical crisis, the gesture said, in the universal language of a man narrating his own importance to a camera. I stabilized the captain. She watched for a moment, felt nothing sharper than a distant, tired amusement, and looked away. It did not matter to her. It had never mattered to her. Inside the cockpit, First Officer Diaz was being debriefed by the lead investigator, a woman named Agent Reyes, whose questions were thorough, procedural, and entirely focused on the mechanical sequence of the flight, the incapacitation, the diversion decision, the wind shear event, the landing itself. Walk me through the final approach, Reyes said. Pen ready. Diaz did the descent, the first wind shear at 2,000 feet, the recovery, the second shear at 140 feet, more severe, closer to the ground, with less margin for error. And at that point, Reyes said, who had the controls? Diaz did not hesitate. I did. The whole way down. He paused, for about a second and a half, at 140 feet. A passenger assisted with a correction. She called the rudder input, and had her hand on the yoke briefly to level the wings. Then she released control back to me, and I flew the rest of the approach and the landing myself. Reyes looked up from her notes. A passenger, a nurse, who identified herself as a former military pilot. She assisted throughout medical care for the captain, and cockpit support during the diversion and approach. Her name, Diaz hesitated, not from evasiveness, but because in the compression of the last hour, he realized he had never actually asked. Sarah, he said. I don't have a last name. She's on the flight manifest. Seat 1 for C. Reyes found her 20 minutes later, Sitting alone in a corner of the small private terminal the passengers had been moved to while the aircraft was inspected, a gate lounge with vending machines and a television mounted in the corner, currently playing a local news segment with the sound muted. Closed captions scrolling beneath grainy footage of the aircraft on the runway. Sarah was eating a small packet of crackers from the vending machine. Still in her scrubs, her duffel bag on the seat beside her, Reyes sat down across from her. Another investigator settling into the seat beside her, both with clipboards balanced on their knees. Ms. Cole, Reyes said. I'm Agent Reyes, FAA. I understand you assisted the flight crew today. I did what I could. The first officer credits you with a significant contribution to a safe outcome. I need to document your role for the investigation, and I have some follow-up questions about your background, specifically your aviation experience, since it appears to have been relevant to how you assisted. Sarah set down the cracker packet. She had known this moment would arrive from the instant. She stepped through the cockpit door 45 minutes into the flight. She had made her peace with it somewhere over the wind shear at 2,000 feet. In the strange calm space that exists in the middle of a crisis, when a person accepts that consequences, whatever they turn out to be, will simply have to be dealt with afterward. She reached into the inner pocket of her duffel bag, a pocket she had not opened in over a year, and withdrew a small folded leather case. She set it on the table between them. Reyes opened it. Inside, an FAA airline transport pilot certificate, the highest civilian pilot qualification available. Current, valid, with type ratings listed for multiple aircraft categories, including transport category jets. Beneath it, a second card, plain government issued, with a seal that Reyes recognized immediately, and that made her sit up slightly straighter in her chair. Military identification, a branch designation, a rank that had not been active in over 4 years, but that had clearly, at some point, carried significant operational weight. Reyes looked up. Sarah was looking out the window, past her, at the aircraft still sitting on the remote stand. Ground crew, moving around it with the specific unhurried thoroughness of people conducting a post-incident inspection. You were a nurse today, Reyes said slowly. But you weren't just a nurse. I am a nurse, Sarah said. That's not a today thing. That's what I do now. And before, Sarah was quiet for a moment. Before, I flew people out of places where flying them out was the only thing standing between them, living and not living. I did that for 11 years. I'm not going to give you details beyond what's relevant to your investigation. And most of what I did isn't relevant to your investigation, because it happened in aircraft that don't have tail numbers you'll find in any civilian registry. Reyes absorbed this. She had seen enough over the course of her career to recognize the particular texture of a person choosing, deliberately, not to elaborate on something that could not be elaborated on in a public terminal, with a colleague present and a notepad open. I need a statement about today, Reyes said. Just today. Nothing before it. That I can give you. The statement took 11 minutes. Sarah gave it in the same clean, procedural language she'd used to hand off Harris to the paramedics. Dates, times, actions, decisions, nothing embellished, nothing omitted that mattered, nothing volunteered that didn't. When it was finished, Reyes closed her notebook. Captain Harris is stable, she said. I got an update 10 minutes ago. He's in the cath lab now. They're saying the early intervention, the compressions, the AEDs, likely saved significant heart function, possibly saved his life outright. Something in Sarah's chest loosened, very slightly, at that. Thank you for telling me. The airline is going to want to speak with you, possibly the press. Though I understand from Monica, the lead flight attendant, that you'd prefer to avoid that. I would. I can't promise anything about what happens once this becomes public. A plane full of people watched a nurse walk into a cockpit today. Somebody will talk, probably several somebodies. Sarah looked at the muted television in the corner, where the local news segment had shifted to blurry telephoto footage of the aircraft. A graphic reading, mid-air, medical emergency across the bottom of the screen. People will talk, she agreed. That's fine. I can't control that. She stood, picked up her duffel bag, and slid the leather case back into its pocket. Is there anything else you need from me tonight? Reyes looked at her for a long moment. The look of someone recognizing that the person in front of her was not going to offer anything further than what had already been given, and that pushing would not change that. No, she said. Get some rest, Ms. Cole. I intend to. 3 days later, Memorial Regional Hospital, 6:47 in the morning. Sarah Cole badged in through the staff entrance the same way she always did, a quick tap against the reader. A soft green light, the door releasing with its familiar mechanical click. She had not gone to Portland's coast after all. She had spent one night in a hotel room she barely remembered checking into, slept 11 hours without moving, and flown home the next afternoon on a different airline, in a different seat, watching the clouds without watching them at all. She had told no one at the hospital what had happened. There had been no reason to. The story, as Reyes had predicted, had found its way into the news, a local segment first, then picked up more widely, framed exactly the way these things always were. Mystery woman helps land emergency flight. The footage was thin, a grainy clip from a passenger's phone, taken through the small cockpit window during boarding disembarkation. A woman in scrubs, head slightly down, walking toward the terminal, her face never quite catching the light. No name, no hospital, no details beyond what the airline's brief statement had confirmed. A passenger with prior aviation experience had assisted the flight crew during a medical emergency and subsequent diversion, contributing to a safe outcome for all 214 souls aboard. The airline had wanted more from her, a statement, an interview, possibly an award ceremony, the kind with a photograph and a plaque, and a local news anchor, asking how it felt to be a hero. She had declined all of it, politely, consistently, until the requests stopped coming. She changed in the locker room, pulled her hair back without looking at the mirror, clipped her badge to her left breast pocket. Sarah Cole, registered nurse, Memorial Regional Hospital. She walked to the nursing station on Ward 7C. Cole. Patricia looked up from her handoff notes. Same as every morning. You're early, same time as always. How was Portland? Sarah accepted the chart stack. Quiet, she said. Good to get away. Patricia gave her the handoff. Nothing unusual. A steady overnight. One patient in bed 12 who'd need close monitoring after a difficult surgery. Mr. Fenton discharged 2 days earlier. Doing well. Had asked the discharge nurse to pass along his thanks. Sarah nodded, made a note, and began her rounds. At 7:15, Daniel, the junior nurse, who had encouraged her a week earlier to apply for the charge nurse position, passed her in the hallway with a coffee in each hand. Morning, he said. Good trip. It was fine. You look tired. Red-eye flight. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had, in fact, flown at night. She simply left out which flight and what had happened 38,000 feet above Idaho on the one before it. Daniel didn't press. He never did. He handed her one of the coffees, black, no sugar, the way she always took it. A small kindness he performed most mornings without comment, and continued down the hall toward his own rounds. Sarah stood for a moment in the corridor, coffee in hand, and let the ordinary sounds of the ward settle around her. A call bell somewhere down the hall, a cart being wheeled past, the low murmur of a doctor discussing discharge instructions with a patient's family, the specific, unremarkable music of a hospital at 7 in the morning. Indistinguishable from any other morning she had worked in the 11 years since she'd stopped flying. She had missed this, in a way she rarely let herself examine too closely. Not the crisis, not the adrenaline, the chance to do work that mattered without anyone needing to know what she had once done, or could still do. In the moments when it mattered in a different, louder way. At 10 o'clock, during a brief lull, she found herself in the break room, refilling her coffee, when the wall-mounted television, usually tuned to a muted daytime talk show that nobody watched, but nobody turned off, either, cycled to a national morning news segment. The anchor's voice was upbeat, practiced, and in follow-up to that dramatic mid-air emergency last week. Aviation officials have confirmed the retired captain has been released from the hospital and is expected to make a full recovery. As for the mystery passenger who assisted the crew, airline officials say she is asked to remain anonymous, and her identity has not been confirmed. Some are already calling her the guardian angel of Flight 7714. We'll continue to follow this story as the segment cut to the same blurry phone footage. The woman in scrubs, head down, walking toward the terminal. Two other nurses in the break room glanced up at the screen, mildly interested. The way people are interested in stories that happen to strangers in places far away. Wild story, one of them said. Imagine being on that flight. I heard she was some kind of Air Force pilot or something, the other said. Isn't that wild? Just sitting there in economy the whole time. Sarah poured her coffee. Wild, she agreed. Neither of them looked at her twice. She was, after all, exactly what she appeared to be in that moment. A tired nurse in blue scrubs, pouring a cup of coffee before her next round, indistinguishable from any other tired nurse in any other hospital break room in the country. She capped the coffee pot, picked up her cup, and glanced at the screen one final time. At the grainy, anonymous woman on the tarmac, who was and was not her, who belonged now to a story other people would tell however they needed to tell it. Then she turned and walked back down the hall toward her first patient of the morning. Bed 9. This time, a new patient. Post-op, first day anxious, the way most people were on their first day. She knocked once, softly, and stepped inside. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Sarah. I'll be with you today." The door closed quietly behind her. Outside, the hospital continued its steady rhythm. The same rhythm it always kept. The same rhythm it would keep tomorrow, and the day after that. Indifferent to what had happened 38,000 feet above Idaho. Indifferent to who had been sitting in seat 1 for C. Asking nothing of the quiet woman in scrubs, except that she'd keep doing exactly as she always had, the work in front of her. The end.